Alright, hello world. I'm going to talk to you today about atomic force microscopy, which is a commonly used nanoimaging technique, and it's awesome, so listen up. This is you, and imagine that you're standing at the base of a mountain range. You have an idea that there's some peaks, but you don't have a three-dimensional idea of where they all are and how high they are. So how could you figure this out? This is still you, and now you're holding a GPS, and you're standing on the surface of Earth, which means you can talk to GPS satellites in space, and they'll tell you exactly where you are with your GPS coordinates being read out in latitude, longitude, and altitude. Now, if you walk in a pattern like this across the mountain range, recording your coordinates as you go, you could map all that information out. This would give you something called a topographic map, where you could draw lines of similar altitude over a two-dimensional region that is the mountain range. You could use this to find the peaks of the mountain. Okay, so what does this have to do with atomic force microscopy? Well, atomic force microscopy takes the same principle that we just used to look at something that's much too large for us to see and applies it to things that are much too small for us to see, like molecules, which exist on the nanometer scale, which is 1/1000th of a meter. Now, when you hear atomic force microscopy, which people call AFM for short, you hear the word microscope, and you might think of something that looks like this, which you used in your high school biology class to look at a paramecium you found in some pond water. But these techniques are totally different. The best optical microscopes on the world are limited to a resolution of hundreds of nanometers, whereas an AFM can get resolutions well below 10 nanometers. And this is because they operate under a totally different principle. So how does an AFM actually work? Well, it uses a really sharp probe tip called a cantilever. How sharp is it? At the very tip, it's only a few atoms across. And this tip is scanned along a surface, and it travels up and down, recording the altitude at each height. But how do we know the height, since we don't have GPS satellites to track it as it goes? Lasers. So a laser is bounced off the top of the tip and sent to a detector, which can tell where the laser lands. If the tip bends down, then it changes the angle at which the laser is deflected, and if it bends up, it also changes it. And so this information can be recorded in a computer and used to map everything out later as flats, hills, and valleys. So when you walk along a mountain range, you don't actually hurt the mountain at all. It's pretty much just fine, and it doesn't matter that you're measuring it. But if you're using an AFM, the sample can actually be quite sensitive to the cantilever and can damage it, much like dragging a shovel behind you as you walk through the sand. One way to minimize damage done to the sample is by tapping mode. Now, this means oscillating the cantilever tip up and down, which can be driven by a piezoelectric motor. You want to oscillate it so that the amplitude of the oscillation is always the same, with the lowest point touching the surface. This is done with a feedback loop, where the tip and sample sends the height of the sample to the laser detector, which will tell the computer how high it is, and the computer will adjust the Z height by using the piezoelectric motor. Now, this is done so that the base of the oscillation is always touching the sample. This is called tapping mode, and in practice, it's going to look something like this. It's important to note that the cantilever never actually touches the surface of the sample. It just comes close enough that the repulsive forces push the tip away. And these forces are totally dependent on the chemical makeup of the sample you're measuring, so you have to review your chemistry before you make any conclusions about your measurements. One of the crowning achievements of AFM was the use of it to image a molecule called pentacene, which looks like this. It was done with a cantilever so sharp it was punctuated with a single carbon monoxide molecule. And what's amazing about these images is that you can resolve individual chemical bonds. Plug this into Google Images and you can see for yourself. Alright everyone, that's my short video on how AFM works. I hope this was at least slightly informative, and thanks for watching.